This is the perfect one-day itinerary to visit St. Augustine for couples. A little bit of backstory on how this itinerary came about. My husband and I were taking a road trip. We were taking a road trip all throughout Florida. So we started in Orlando, went up to St. Augustine, and then basically just made a big loop around Florida, coming back to Orlando. My brother was living up near Jacksonville at the time, so he had been to St. Augustine tons of times. And my grandparents were living on the Treasure Coast area, so they would like meet up in St. Augustine a lot, like on weekends. And my niece was like, elementary school age at the time. So they would go to St. Augustine a lot, and a lot of our itinerary was informed from that. So a lot of our itinerary was formed from like their experiences and things that they liked to do whenever they would go to St. Augustine, and then also just like my own research of what JP and I wanted to do when we were visiting, since we were only going to be there for one day. We're not really breakfast people, so I don't really have a breakfast recommendation, and I kind of start the itinerary kind of after the point that you would have had breakfast. We tend to stay at hotels that have like complimentary breakfast, so like maybe we'll grab a snack. So sometimes we'll just grab something quick like at the hotel, or just kind of skip it altogether. So I don't really have anything for that. Additionally, there is an app called GPS My City where you can get like a walking tour guide of this itinerary. So basically it'll be like going on to like maps on your phone, and it'll have all the spots that are recommended already pinpointed, so it can like tell you how to get from place to place. If you want to check that out. We have a lot of our itineraries on there, by the way. This video here was from when we did our road trip. So I've modified this page a little bit, because on this day in particular, we were in Orlando and we were driving up to Jacksonville where my brother lived. We hung out at his house for a bit, had lunch, and then went to St. Augustine for the whole rest of the day. So this video isn't exactly what this itinerary is, since this itinerary is assuming like you're already starting your day here, but you can see a little bit more like photo and video of things that we did while we were in St. Augustine. So the first thing I recommend doing when you get there is doing a horse-drawn carriage tour. I think they have a lot of golf cart tours as well. I prefer the horse-drawn carriage, like it's a nice little splurge, but whatever's available and in your budget is perfectly fine. We like to do this. A lot of the older cities have this, so like New Orleans and Charleston, we've done these. Savannah, we did a like hop-on, hop-off trolley. San Diego, we've done the hop-on, hop-off trolley as well. But it's nice to start off your day doing a tour like this, so like you get your bearings of the city, because they'll take you all over, tell you what everything is. And the guides can also give you recommendations for like things to do, restaurants that they like, places they don't like, things that could be like overrated. So it's nice to just kind of get like, a little quick tour of the city, know what everything is, get some extra information from the local guide, is how we love to start off our day. This is the carriage tour that we did because we were traveling. There would have been 7 of us, so we had to get one like a little bit bigger, but this is what it looked like. There was a ton lining the street, so we let my niece, because she was probably 5 or 6 at the time, pick it out, and of course this is the one that she picked. One of the highlights that you'll see on the tour, outside of the main downtown stretch, so like there's a pedestrian only street called St. George Street, and that's kind of like the main street of visiting St. Augustine. What's nice about the carriage tour is you can get outside of those areas without having to drive or walk that far. But Flagler College is here, and they have the Ponce de Leon Historic Landmark Hotel from the 1800s. The architecture is just really nice here at the college, and there's a lot of history here. So again, it's nice to have like the carriage tour take you out here without having to walk all the way there yourself. Another thing that I enjoyed about the tour as well is seeing the different mix of architecture from the different like eras of things being built in St. Augustine. So there's a lot of Spanish, a lot of English, a lot of American styles. These pictures here don't necessarily match these exact 3 things, but the Cathedral Basilica is here. The Castillo de San Marcos, I have later on some photos. It's an old fort, but then you can just see how this kind of the colonial era of buildings. So it's nice to just kind of see a little mix in a city that is as old as St. Augustine is. For lunch, I recommend going to Meehan's Irish Pub and Seafood House. We had the fish and chips, also got a side of mac and cheese. I I tend to get mac and cheese pretty much everywhere I go as a side. And then we had bread pudding with dessert, or for dessert, which was really great. And here's kind of what the place looks like so that you can find it easy. They have, you know, a little bit of everything. It's not solely like Irish pub foods. They have other things as well, but we tried to go with the theme of the type of place we were eating at. And then after lunch is when you want to explore St. George Street. So this is where you'll kind of spend the bulk of your day. So this street here, you can see it's pedestrian only, so it's easy to get back and forth between all the shops, all the restaurants, all the attractions. There's lots of little attractions kind of sprinkled out, like a little museum here and there or some kind of activity that are all pretty cheap, usually less than like $20. So you can kind of pick and choose what extra things you want to do, but this is just kind of to get a vibe and feel for what it looks like. This is from like a candy and sweets shop. They have a little bit of everything there. One of the things you'll see is the oldest wooden schoolhouse. It's another historic landmark. So it's the oldest wooden schoolhouse in the US, and you can see how it has become very settled and stuff, but you can go in there. A very popular activity is the Citygate Spirits Distillery. So it is a like moonshine tasting basically, and it's free to go in and do the tasting. It's just required that you leave a tip. So it's not free, but you know. So moonshine, vodka, and rum. It's all very strong things that I don't particularly love, so I would only take like the tiniest little sip. But they're really known for their apple pie moonshine, and it's just nice that there's like things you can do to entertain yourself throughout the day without having to like spend a lot of money on every single thing. Okay, so here's the Castillo de San Marcos. It is an old fort, as you can tell. They have tours where you can go inside, but just to be like out here walking around like where all these pictures are is completely free. So you don't necessarily have to pay to do a tour if just kind of, you know, walking the moat area around it is sufficient, really. For dinner, I recommend a couple things. So the Teeny Martini Bar at the Casablanca Inn is very popular. This one is a favorite of my grandparents and brother, and this was like the one place that they insisted on going. So we went there. And here's the martini, but you know, you can get more than just that. And then Isabella's Bar Cuba. I went here for the sangria. This is the sangria. They like fill the glass up all the way. And so I really like that one. That's a good one for just like hanging out. You could even do it more in like the afternoon too, as like a little break to just be, you know, just kind of sitting down and out of the sun, especially if you're visiting when it's really hot. Because we were there in the summer, like in June, I think. Could have been July, but I think it was June. So those are some places to go there. And what's nice here, you can see it's the seating right here on the main road, so you can dine outside. People get some fresh air. The water is just over here as well. And then for the evening, the top activity would definitely be like a cemetery or ghost tour. We've been doing ghost tours everywhere we've been going lately, even in cities that aren't necessarily like historic cities, because like we've done them in like in Savannah you would do a ghost tour, or Williamsburg, we've done a couple of those, but we've done them in like Cincinnati, Virginia Beach. It's just nice also because you know you walk like, you know, a couple miles of the main area, you get to hear more stories about the area, and it's just, you know, interesting facts. It's a good way to entertain yourself in the evening, because a lot of these places, like the attractions and things are closed and you've already eaten dinner, so it's like, well, what else can you do other than just like sit at your hotel? So it's good to go do like a ghost tour or cemetery tour. And here is the main cemetery right out. It's literally like right there on the edge of town. It kind of like greets you as you come into town, so that is a great evening option. And then for where to stay, there's a couple different ones that I recommend. One thing is that we like to stick with one particular brand as much as possible so that you can earn more rewards for free nights or like upgraded stays or just kind of extra little perks and benefits that will add up over time. So for us, it's Hilton. So the Hilton St. Augustine Historic Bayfront is right there in town. It's great if you're able to splurge to be right there in town so that you don't have to drive in for the day. You don't have to worry about parking. You know, you can go back to your room as much as you want throughout the day if you need to. It's in a super convenient location. And then another one that's popular in the area, it's over by Flagler College. So it is really just down the street. This one's not really much further. But the Casablanca Resort and Spa, it's another historic one. and this is what it looks like. So they have really cool historic places to stay in, and I recommend doing stuff like that. I think there's also a lot of like bed and breakfast type places if you stay outside of the center of town. They also have like the typical like middle of the road type of brands like Hampton Inns. That's what we tend to stay in when we're traveling, just because they usually have free parking, free breakfast. It's the most affordable of the Hilton brands without being like motel-like. So there's a ton of options around here, but I do recommend, especially if you're doing like a couple's weekend, like staying right there in town where you can just go back to the room easily and not have to be out and about for the whole entire day. Some frequently asked questions. If you've even considered, like, is St. Augustine even like a romantic city at all? Like, to take like a couple's weekend? I would think so, just because of like the historicness of it. Like, it would be no different than like, you know, thinking of Europe as being romantic because of all, you know, all these buildings from like the 1600s. So it's very much in that sense. And one thing to keep in mind, it is not a open container city. So you, even though they have like that pedestrian street, you can't just like walk around with alcohol, unfortunately, or fortunately, depends on who you ask. But that's something to keep in mind. It's not like Vegas where you can, you know, just roam around. St. Augustine does have a lot of like festivals and events and stuff, but I would not consider it a party city by any stretch. Like, you know, Miami and Vegas would be that. St. Augustine is nowhere near that. Or even like how Key West can be a party town at times. St. Augustine isn't really like that. So the main tourist street, again, St. George Street, is where you're gonna do like the vast majority of your like sightseeing and the different attractions and the dining and stuff like that. Some more fun places to visit while you're in Florida. So I grew up going to Florida every summer. I would stay there for like a month, and we would go to Disney for a week or two. I'd stay with my grandparents for a week or two. And then I went to college in Florida, went to grad school in Florida partially. I finished it online. Afterwards, my family lives in Florida now, so we have been all over Florida. So these are kind of some of my top recommendations to do. The Kennedy Space Center over by like Port Canaveral, Cocoa Beach area is a really good place to go to at least once. The Treasure Coast, so that's just a little bit farther south of that. It's a much more quieter area, a lot less tourists and really tourist attractions, but it's good for just like a chill like beach weekend. Lots of good restaurants too. Doing like an A1A road trip, so starting all the way up at the top tip of Florida, going all the way down to Miami or even all the way down to Key West is what we did for this, except we continued on to do even more beyond that. But that's a really fun road trip that you can do. If you actually want to stop and do things along the way, I would plan like at least 5 days to do this, but you could obviously, you know, drive the whole thing in a day if you were just driving straight through. Biscayne National Park is just outside of Miami. The entire park is really just water with a few keys like this, and they take all kinds of different boats and all kinds of different excursion combinations. So we did one that was kind of like an all-day thing. I think it was like 6 hours or something, where they take you snorkeling, stand-up paddleboarding, you do a picnic lunch on the island, and then you take a sailboat around. On our particular day, it was supposed to be a sailboat, but there was no wind, so we took like a regular like motorized boat out instead, which totally fine. I was there more so just to see the place, do the activities. And then Key West, I have an itinerary for a great day trip there. I've gone a couple of times now, so I just kind of compiled the best things to do all in one day, since I've visited for, I guess, a total of like 4 or 5 days now. But the highlights that you can fit in one day are all in there. The Everglades National Park, if you've never been, the best way to see it is one of these airboat tours. I personally like the Coopertown ones, but there are a few others. And then there are some places where they've built out like boardwalks where you can walk and like paved trails and stuff like that. And then last but not least, all of the things that I mentioned above, including St. Augustine, I have put together in a 1-week Florida road trip itinerary. And this is that road trip that we did, starting and ending in Orlando, doing this whole loop, coming back up to Tampa, coming back to Orlando. I highly recommend checking that out for more ideas on places that you can go to kind of see some of the best highlights of Florida in just a week. I also have this free guide for free things to do in Florida. It's great to save money on some things so that you can splurge on others, or save money on some things so that you can even go on the trip in the first place. You know, either one applies, so these are our favorite things to do in Florida. And that is everything I have for this St. Augustine 1-day itinerary for couples.